George Burns always said he did not tell jokes. He claimed he told stories, little moments from life, sometimes stretched, sometimes softened, sometimes completely twisted, but never jokes. He liked to confuse people with that idea. He would say something like, "This is not a joke, this really happened," and then deliver a line that made everyone laugh anyway. That was his style. Even when he talked about something serious, humor somehow slipped in. He joked about aging, illness, and even death, saying he had nothing much to lose and never really got the blues. He admitted that if someone asked him to perform in a small room without a stage, he would freeze, but once he stepped onto a stage, something changed. The audience gave him energy. Their laughter carried him. For nearly 80 years, George Burns became one of America's most beloved comedians. Over time, he built a fortune estimated at more than $30 million. Many assumed that his two adopted children would inherit everything. But in March 1996, shortly before his death, Burns made a decision that shocked almost everyone. He removed his children entirely from his will. Every dollar went elsewhere. His family was left confused and hurt, searching for answers. Friends later said that Burns carried secrets with him, things he never shared, and that the real reason behind his decision had roots in a deep betrayal from long ago. George Burns was born on January 20, 1896, in a small apartment on the Lower East Side of New York City. At birth, his name was Nathan Birnbaum. The neighborhood was crowded, noisy, and full of life. His parents, Dora and Louis, were Jewish immigrants who had fled hardship in Eastern Europe, bringing old traditions into a harsh new world. They had 12 children, and George was the 9th. The family lived in 3 tiny rooms where warmth came more from bodies pressed together than from blankets. Money was always short. Louis worked as a candy maker, but his income barely covered food. Dora washed clothes for neighbors to earn a little extra. Like many children in the area, George wore hand-me-down clothes and shared beds with siblings. Dinner was often just potatoes and onions, and even bread felt like a luxury. Yet despite the poverty, George remembered laughter filling the rooms. Yiddish jokes, teasing, and storytelling were part of daily life. That early humor stayed inside him and later shaped everything he became. When George was 8 years old, everything changed. In 1904, his father suddenly died at the age of 47. The family had no savings and no safety net. George had to leave school after the 5th grade to help support them. He stood on street corners shining shoes for 5 cents a shine. The work was cold, exhausting, and humiliating at times, but he endured it. Occasionally, he earned extra money singing with a children's group called the Imperial Five. Even that small bit of hope collapsed one night when their promoter disappeared with their pay. George found himself homeless, sleeping in alleyways and learning what true hunger and fear felt like. Those nights were brutal, but later he would say they trained him for life. They taught him toughness, awareness, and how to survive without falling apart. As he grew older, his identity kept shifting. His family called him Natty. Other kids mocked him with nicknames tied to his shoeshine box. He rolled cigars, sold newspapers, and sneaked into burlesque theaters whenever he could to watch comedians perform. He became fascinated with how laughter could be created out of nothing. During his early teens, he made a reckless bet and tried to swim across the East River. The strong current dragged him under, and he nearly drowned. The fear stayed with him, but so did a strange thrill. It pushed him to take more risks. Around that time, he began experimenting with stage names. The name George Burns came partly from his brother Izzy, whose surname had been Americanized, and partly from the Burns Brothers Coal Company. He had once stolen coal from them to keep his family warm. He also tried other names like Willie Delight and Captain Betts, hoping to trick booking agents into giving him more work. Reinvention became a survival tool. At 14, George ran away from home. In 1910, he joined a traveling group called the Mickey Rooney Stock Company, dreaming of success as a singer. His first paid performance took place in a small Midwestern theater. When he stepped on stage, panic took over. He forgot every lyric. The audience booed loudly, throwing pennies at him until he fled the stage. He was fired immediately. The embarrassment was intense, but later he would say it was one of the best lessons he ever learned. After that failure, he wandered through the Midwest, singing wherever someone might pay him. He performed on ferryboats, street corners, and in places most people avoided. Some days he barely ate. Some nights he slept wherever he could. Life was hard, but he felt alive, and he refused to quit. By 1913, at the age of 17, he formed a singing trio called the Burning Three with two sisters, Beatrice and Irene. They toured rough vaudeville houses filled with tough, unforgiving crowds. One day, Irene suddenly ran off with a sailor, leaving George and Beatrice stranded without money. George begged for train fare and returned to New York broke and discouraged, but still determined. Those early years taught him how to improvise, how to handle dishonest theater owners who refused to pay, and how to survive failure without losing hope. When World War I began, George tried to join the Navy, but he was rejected for being too short. Instead of giving up, he found another way. Disguised as a woman named Barbara, he joined groups of entertainers traveling on troop ships. It was dangerous, and discovery could have meant serious trouble, but he pulled it off. He sang for homesick soldiers while constantly fearing exposure. Later he laughed about it, but at the time it was pure survival. In 1916, he teamed up with a dancer named Elsie Lorraine. Together, they created a ballroom act and performed along the East Coast. For a moment, it felt like his break had arrived. Then Elsie left him for a wealthier man, and George was once again alone and broke. Exhausted, he took a job as a soda jerk on Coney Island's boardwalk. While serving ice cream, he tested jokes on customers. Some laughed, some ignored him, but each reaction taught him something about timing and human behavior. He later joked that this job helped his career more than any producer ever did. By 1920, he was performing solo under the name George Burns. He worked in speakeasies during Prohibition, where police raids were common. One night, he hid in a coal bin to avoid arrest. When he climbed out, he was covered in soot, humiliated, but oddly energized. These experiences made him realize he needed a partner, someone who could balance him on stage. That person appeared in 1923 when he met Gracie Allen in Chicago. She was a performer whose family act had fallen apart. At first, George planned to be the funny one while Gracie played the straight role. But once they performed together, everything changed. Audiences laughed hardest at Gracie's strange logic and innocent confusion. George recognized her brilliance immediately and adjusted the act so she could shine. Their chemistry was undeniable. They married in January 1926, blending their personal and professional lives completely. Success followed. They climbed the vaudeville circuit, headlined major theaters, and eventually became national stars. Gracie's health problems were hidden behind her cheerful performance, and George stood by her through it all. Together, they moved into radio, film, and television, becoming one of the most successful comedy teams in history. George also proved to be smart with money. While others spent freely, he invested quietly, buying property during the Great Depression when prices were low. Those decisions secured their future when many performers lost everything. Their radio show launched in 1932 and made them household names. George Burns became known for his cigar, his calm delivery, and his sharp timing. Even after Gracie's retirement and death, he continued performing well into old age. He joked about being old, about doctors, and about dying, but beneath the humor was a man shaped by poverty, loss, reinvention, and survival. By the time he reached the end of his life, he had lived nearly a century, experienced every rise and fall imaginable, and built a legacy that extended far beyond laughter. Yet his final decision to cut his children out of his will reminded everyone that even the most familiar public figures carry private pain and untold stories, hidden behind the smile that the world remembers. Each episode of their radio show lasted just 15 minutes, but within that short time, Gracie's strange misunderstandings somehow managed to solve every problem. Her logic made no sense on the surface, yet it always landed perfectly. By the mid-1930s, Nearly 40 million people were tuning in every week. That number was almost unbelievable at a time when most radio programs struggled to reach even half that audience. The show felt loose and natural. Much of it was improvised, and listeners could hear real laughter, real confusion, and genuine chemistry between George and Gracie. Nothing sounded forced. The ratings proved how powerful that approach was. Within a single year, their rating jumped from 19.3 to 31.3, an increase of more than 60%. They showed the industry that radio did not need strict scripts or heavy polish. What it needed was honesty, rhythm, and two people who trusted each other completely. In 1933, Gracie took things even further by launching a fake presidential campaign as part of a long-running joke called the Surprise Party. What started as comedy quickly turned into a nationwide event. Gracie toured 39 states, gave speeches, and even printed ballots. Some people took it so seriously that during the real 1940 election, voters actually wrote her name in. Local officials were confused until they realized it was part of a comedy stunt. Her campaign promises were ridiculous on purpose. She said she would tax only the right kind of clouds and give cabinet positions to friends who wore nice outfits. The campaign mascot was a kangaroo, and the slogan was "It's in the bag." The joke worked because it felt oddly familiar. Their radio ratings jumped nearly 40%, and newspapers began asking uncomfortable questions about how easily entertainment could blend with politics. It was meant to be funny, but it also reflected how absurd public life could be. Behind the scenes, their partnership continued to surprise people. George wrote almost every script, but he always told the public that Gracie was the true creative force. At a time when men usually took all the credit, he went out of his way to highlight her talent. In one 1935 episode, Gracie joked that she had forgotten she was married to George. Many listeners believed it was real. Thousands of letters flooded in, accusing George of mistreating her. The situation became so serious that he had to go on live radio to explain that their marriage was strong and happy. Instead of hurting them, the confusion only boosted their popularity. Ratings rose another 20%. People loved that the line between reality and comedy felt so thin. In 1934, they moved their show to CBS for an astonishing $10,000 a week. At a time when most Americans earned less than $2,000 in an entire year, the number seemed unreal. They began weaving real events from their lives into the show. When Gracie needed an emergency appendectomy in 1937, they turned her surgery into part of the storyline and even brought real doctors onto the broadcast. The mix of truth and comedy fascinated audiences and changed how radio storytelling worked. Listeners felt like they knew them personally, as if they were part of the family. By 1938, their success allowed them to buy a mansion in Beverly Hills. It should have been a peaceful reward, but even that turned into comedy. One night, George left a lit cigar on a table. It rolled, burned through fabric, and started a fire that spread quickly. They barely saved the house. Newspapers rushed to cover the story. Instead of hiding from embarrassment, they turned the incident into a radio episode called The House That Burns Built. Gracie blamed herself in the script and joked about the disaster so naturally that audiences loved them even more. Their ability to laugh at their own mistakes became part of their charm. Hollywood soon became another major chapter in their lives. Their move into movies began after their big radio broadcast in 1932, where their song Love and Bloom made them national figures. But film studios often clashed with their style. Executives thought Gracie's jokes sounded too suggestive and demanded rewrites. George would quietly slip the original lines back in as ad-libs during filming. That playful rebellion helped shape how comedians later pushed against strict studio rules. In 1933, Gracie nearly suffered a serious injury while filming International House when the wire holding her chandelier stunt snapped and dropped her about 10 feet. George happened to be standing below her and caught her, cracking 2 ribs in the process. They laughed and kept performing as if it were part of the act. The cameras kept rolling, and the moment ended up in the film, turning a near tragedy into comedy history. In 1937, they worked with Fred Astaire on A Damsel in Distress. During one scene, Gracie panicked and forgot her dance steps, blurting out that she was lost in London. Astaire didn't miss a beat. He danced around her confusion and turned it into a spontaneous routine that left the entire set laughing. He later called it pure magic. It showed how quick thinking could transform accidents into unforgettable moments. During World War II, they performed for troops in 1941, lifting spirits across military camps. Around that time, Gracie became involved in a strange scandal. Silk stockings were scarce during the war, and she secretly brought a few pairs to give as gifts. Authorities treated it as contraband, and she nearly faced serious consequences until George used his influence to smooth things over. The troops loved her even more afterward. It became one of those hidden stories that revealed how bold she truly was. By 1945, they were at the peak of their fame. Their film Two Girls and a Sailor earned more than $4 million. But Gracie's health was beginning to fail. She suffered from severe migraines that forced her to step away for 6 months. During that break, George quietly began drafting his autobiography. He wanted to preserve their story, especially the private moments only they understood. That draft later became Gracie, a love story, a book that captured the heart of their partnership. On October 12, 1950, a quiet revolution entered American living rooms. CBS aired the first episode of The George Burns and Gracie Allen Show. It was filmed live with a studio audience, which felt risky at the time. But when George stepped out of scenes and spoke directly to viewers, people felt personally connected. The show ran for 291 episodes until 1958 and earned them nearly $200,000 per season at its peak. They played exaggerated versions of themselves, making audiences feel like they were watching real life unfold. That choice helped shape the future of family sitcoms. One unforgettable moment came in November 1951 during a live episode featuring a surprise birthday party for George. A prop cake exploded too early, sending frosting everywhere. The cast froze, then burst into real laughter. The producers let it air. Viewers loved the chaos. That messy accident became one of the most talked about scenes of the decade. Behind the laughter, however, there was pain. In the early 1950s, George admitted he had once had a one-night affair while on tour. The guilt haunted him. To make amends, he bought Gracie an expensive diamond ring and a silver centerpiece. She never confronted him. Years later, he revealed the truth in his autobiography. Even then, Gracie's humor shone through. She once joked that she wished he would cheat again because she could use another centerpiece. As the decade passed, Gracie's health worsened. She had lived with heart problems since childhood, but by the late 1950s, they became impossible to ignore. George told the public she was simply on vacation, protecting her privacy. She retired in 1958 and died on August 27, 1964, from a heart attack. Her death broke George completely. For years afterward, he kept an empty chair on stage during performances and spoke to it as if she were still there. Audiences cried with him. Life moved on, but nothing was the same. He tried new projects, struggled alone, rebuilt himself, and faced his own health battles. In 1976, at age 80, he shocked Hollywood by winning an Academy Award for The Sunshine Boys. Late life success followed, including Oh God, which reintroduced him to a new generation. He continued performing well into his 90s, surviving surgeries, falls, and exhaustion with stubborn determination. In 1996, George Burns died at home just weeks after turning 100. His estate, worth over $30 million, went to charity. His children received nothing, a final decision that surprised many but reflected his lifelong habit of giving quietly. His influence never faded. Modern comedians still study his timing, his restraint, and his ability to let silence speak. Behind the cigars and jokes stood a man who lived through poverty, loss, love, regret, and resilience, and turned it all into laughter that lasted for generations.